The wind had already stripped the yard bare when she reached his gate, fingers raw where the fabric of her sleeves had worn through, boots barely holding together under the dust of a road that hadn't spared her once. He saw her before she spoke, saw the way she didn't step closer, didn't beg twice, just stood there like leaving would finish what the world had started. "I'll work," she said, quiet, steady. Inside, two small voices drifted through the open window, then fell silent. He closed his eyes once, because work wasn't what his house was missing. When he looked at her again, his voice came low, careful. "Can you be what they lost?" Before we ride deeper into this tale, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another journey through the dust, danger, and legends of the Wild West. Now, back to the trail. The wind dragged dust across the yard in long, restless breaths, rattling loose boards and whispering through gaps that had never been fixed. Elias Boone stood just beyond the porch, one hand resting against the post, eyes fixed on the figure at his gate. She hadn't moved in several minutes, not forward, not back. Just there, like the land itself had decided she would go no farther. Her clothes told the story plain enough. Fabric worn thin at the elbows, hem torn where it had caught too many miles of road, boots splitting at the seams, barely holding shape. But it wasn't the rags that held him still. It was the way she carried them, upright, quiet, like she'd already asked the world for help and learned not to ask again. "I'll work." Her voice didn't carry far. The wind took most of it. Still, he heard it clear enough. Elias said nothing. Behind him, through the open window, the house shifted. A chair leg scraped softly across wood, then a whisper, then silence. The kind that came from two small bodies holding their breath at the same time. He didn't turn to look at them, didn't need to. They were always listening now, always waiting to see what stayed and what left. The woman at the gate didn't speak again. Didn't step closer to make herself harder to ignore. That was the part that unsettled him. Most who came this far had something left to bargain with. Words, tears, anger. She had none of it, just stillness, just that one offer laid down like it was the last thing she owned. Elias pushed off the post and walked toward her, boots heavy against the packed dirt. Each step felt measured, like he was crossing into something he hadn't agreed to yet. The closer he got, the more he saw the finer details, the small cuts along her hands, the way her fingers curled slightly as if they'd forgotten what it meant to rest. Her eyes didn't drop when he stopped a few feet short. They held steady, not defiant, not pleading, just there. "You alone?" he asked. A pause, not long, just enough to make the answer weigh something. "Yes." He studied her a moment longer, then glanced past her shoulder at the empty stretch of road. Nothing moved out there. No rider, no wagon. Distance, the kind that swallowed people whole. Behind him, the floor creaked again, softer this time, one of the girls shifting closer to the window. He could feel it without seeing, that quiet pull, that fragile kind of hope that didn't dare show itself too soon. Elias exhaled slow, eyes closing for a brief second. Work, that's what she asked for, simple, clean, but there was nothing simple left in that house. When he opened his eyes again, they didn't settle on her clothes or her hands. They settled on the space behind her, the space where something used to stand, where something had been missing too long. His voice came low, careful, like speaking it too loud might make it break. "Work ain't the trouble here." She didn't move, didn't ask what he meant, so he said it anyway. "House like mine, it don't need another pair of hands." The wind shifted, catching the edge of her sleeve. For a second, it looked like it might pull her away. She held her ground. Elias' jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, in something closer to restraint. Then he looked at her fully, not as a stranger at his gate, as a choice. "Can you be what they lost?" The words settled between them, heavier than anything he'd said before. Inside the house, the silence deepened. Waiting, the woman didn't answer right away, didn't pretend to understand it all, but something in her expression shifted. Not fear, not surprise, recognition, like she knew what it meant to step into a place that wasn't empty, just broken. She gave a single nod, small, final. And in that moment, Elias Boone understood something he hadn't let himself consider. He hadn't offered her work. He'd opened the door to something neither of them knew how to carry, and she had stepped toward it anyway. She gave her name only after Elias had stepped aside and let her cross the threshold. Clara Hale. Nothing more followed. No town, no people, no past laid out neat enough to be measured, just the name offered in a voice too worn to waste itself on explanation. Elias nodded once, as if that was all he had asked for, and maybe it was. He took her satchel from her hand without ceremony, felt how light it was, then set it near the door. The girls stood halfway down the narrow hall, not close enough to greet her, not far enough to pretend they weren't watching. The older one held herself still in that careful way children do, when they've learned too early that the wrong kind of hope can hurt. The younger one leaned out from behind her sister's shoulder, eyes wide, fingers knotted in the fabric of her dress. "This is Anna, and Lucy," Elias said. The older girl dipped her chin. The younger copied her, a beat too late. Clara looked at them the way a person might look at skittish birds, softly, without reaching. "Hello." Neither answered. That silence should have embarrassed somebody. Instead, it hung there plain and honest, like another piece of furniture in a house already crowded with unspoken things. Elias showed Clara the washroom, the kitchen, the small back room where she could sleep. It had once been used for storage, then for sewing, then for nothing at all after grief had stripped the house down to use and endurance. The bed was narrow. The blanket folded at its foot had been mended twice and worn thin anyway. Clara ran her hand over the quilt once, not in complaint, but in something closer to gratitude, and that stirred an unease in Elias he couldn't quite name. "There's water in the basin," he said, "wood for the stove by the rear step, supper's whatever's left in the pot." As she nodded, "Thank you." He lingered a second longer, studying her as if the truth might slip loose if he watched hard enough. In better light, he could see what the dusk had hidden. The marks across her knuckles were old, pale and tight. There was a crescent scar near the base of her thumb, another along the inside of her wrist where no kitchen burn would have landed. Her hands were not the hands of someone merely poor. They were the hands of someone who had held on against force and paid for it. He noticed, said nothing. By the time the first frost silvered the windows, Clara had washed, changed into one of his late wife's plain work dresses, and tied back her hair. The dress hung a little loose through the shoulders, and that bothered him more than if it had fit. It made absence visible, made comparison too easy. He looked away before the thought had time to root. At supper, the girls sat stiff and quiet, spoons moving slowly through stew that had been reheated one time too many. Clara took the smallest portion for herself and kept her eyes down, careful not to disturb the uneasy order already in place. Elias watched Anna watching her, not openly, in fragments, a glance at Clara's hands. Another at the dress, another at her face, as if she were trying to decide whether kindness and disappearance always arrived together. Lucy was less disciplined. She stared outright. Finally, in a voice no bigger than a match flame, she asked, "Are you staying tomorrow?" Elias' jaw tightened. Clara set down her spoon before answering, "If your father still wants the work done." Lucy looked at Elias, not Clara. He said, "She'll be here in the morning." The child nodded, as if that settled more than just tomorrow, though it settled nothing at all. After the meal, Clara asked where he kept the mending. He almost laughed, not from amusement, but from surprise. The mending was everywhere, torn cuffs draped over chairs, stockings stuffed in a basket beneath the table. One of Lucy's aprons hanging from a nail with a split seam that had been waiting months for hands that never came. She gathered the pile without comment and carried it toward the lamp. Her fingers moved with a speed that came from long practice, but there was no haste in her manner. She worked as if the task deserved respect, even when the house itself seemed to have forgotten how to ask for any. The girls went to bed early. Elias did the last of the evening chores with more force than necessary, pitching feed, checking latches, walking the perimeter of the barn as if he expected the dark to have shifted while his back was turned. When he came inside, Clara was still at the table sewing by the low amber light. The room looked different around her, not transformed, just attended to. The distinction mattered more than he wanted it to. "You don't have to finish tonight," he said. "I know." But she kept working. He stood there longer than made sense, coat still on, cold following him in from outside. Her head remained bent over the cloth. The lamp caught on the loose strands near her temple and softened them. He hated that his mind reached for old shapes, hated more that this stranger had stepped into the dead center of a house built around memory and had not broken under the weight of it. At last he said, "Get some sleep." This time she looked up. "You too." He almost answered, didn't. By midnight the wind had changed. It moved lower now, pressing along the walls instead of over them, a lean winter sound with no mercy in it. Elias woke to the creak of a floorboard and sat up before he was fully conscious, hand already reaching toward the rifle propped near the bed. He held still and listened. Nothing. Then another sound, not movement toward the door, toward the window. He stood, crossed the hall in silence, and found Clara in the kitchen with the curtain lifted a fraction, eyes fixed on the yard, swallowed in black. She sensed him before he spoke and let the curtain fall. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. A pause. "Not fully." He waited. She did not explain. The stove had gone low. He crouched and fed it a split log, watched the flame catch. In the orange rise of light, her face looked sharpened by listening, not fear exactly, expectation. As if nights had taught her that trouble often preferred the hour when people were too tired to fight it proper. "You hear something?" he asked. "No." She wrapped her arms around herself. "That's not always what wakes a person." He straightened slowly. Their eyes met only a moment before hers lowered. There it was again, that sense of a wound hidden too deep for daylight. He knew enough not to pry at what wasn't offered. Pain told in its own time, if it told at all. "Nothing comes this far without the dogs sounding first," he said. She nodded, though he could see she did not trust distance the way he did. When she returned to her room, he stood awake in the kitchen for several minutes longer, staring toward the dark glass where only his own shape stared back. He told himself he was listening for hoofbeats, for a gate latch, for anything practical, but the truth sat colder than the floor beneath his feet. He was listening for what had followed her here. Morning came thin and gray. Frost traced the corners of the panes. Clara was already up when Elias entered the kitchen, sleeves rolled, kettle steaming, flour dusting the table in pale clouds. For a second he thought he'd walked into another year altogether. Then the ache behind his ribs reminded him no year ever truly returned. "There was meal left," she said quietly. "I made johnnycakes." Anna and Lucy were at the table, not speaking, but the stiffness in them had shifted. Curiosity had edged out dread by the smallest margin. Lucy had a smear of honey at the corner of her mouth and seemed not to know it. Anna noticed Elias in the doorway and straightened as if caught doing something improper, though all she had been doing was watching Clara turn the cakes in the pan. He sat, ate, said nothing about the food except to ask Lucy for the salt, but he cleaned his plate. That day, Clara worked through the house in the quiet, unshowy way of someone repairing not just objects, but rhythms. She scrubbed the sink till the iron showed brighter through the film of neglect. She aired blankets in the brief noon sun. She stacked the pantry jars by what remained in them rather than by the way they had been abandoned. She found one of Anna's winter shawls in a chest with a missing tie and mended it before anyone asked. She patched Lucy's apron, then the tears in Elia's work shirt, then the seam in the curtain near the back door where cold had been slipping through for weeks. The girls shadowed her from room to room without admitting it. Lucy asked questions every few minutes. Each one bounced first off silence, then answered when Clara saw the asking wasn't meant to trap her. Did you always know how to sew? No. Then who taught you? A woman who believed torn things were still worth the trouble. Lucy considered that as if it was something she might keep. Anna spoke less, but when Clara knelt to relight the kitchen fire, Anna moved closer. You missed a splinter on the left side, she said, pointing to a warped edge of kindling. Clara glanced over and smiled, not brightly, just enough to honor the help. Then I'm glad you saw it. Anna looked almost startled by being useful. Outside, Elia's split rails repaired a loose hinge, checked the south fence. He worked where he could hear the house now and then. A chair dragged, a bucket filled. Once, so briefly he nearly thought he'd imagined it, Lucy laughed. He froze with the hammer still in his hand. The sound did not come again right away, but the silence afterward had changed shape. Toward evening, Clara carried a basin out to the pump. Elia's met her halfway and took it from her without asking. Their fingers brushed only a moment. Hers went still at once, every muscle tightening before she could hide it. He noticed, said nothing. At the pump he worked the handle while she held the basin. The water came hard and cold, splashing the tin sides. Up close he could see a faded bruise yellowing near her elbow, half hidden by the borrowed sleeve, not fresh, not old enough to forget. His mouth flattened. Rode did that? He asked. She kept her eyes on the rising water, some of it. The answer held enough truth to close the subject and enough omission to sharpen it. That night, while Anna read from the family Bible in the careful monotone she used when trying not to stumble, Clara sat by the lamp turning one of Lucy's stockings inside out to finish the seam. Lucy leaned against the table leg nearest her, not touching, just close. Elias sat by the stove pretending interest in a harness strap that no longer needed mending. The room was quiet enough to hear every page turn, every thread pull. When Anna finished, she lowered the book and looked toward Clara before she seemed to mean to. Do you know any stories? The question startled the room. Clara's hand stilled over the stocking. Stories. For bedtime, Lucy said quickly, as if rescuing the question from shame. Mama used to do voices. Anna doesn't like doing the voices. I do if it's necessary, Anna muttered. Elias ought to have stopped it there, should have. He felt the old danger in such requests, the way children reached toward comfort before the world had agreed to spare them again. But Clara did not rush in to fill the space. She looked first at him, then at the girls, measuring, respecting the line. I know one, she said at last. But no voices. Lucy accepted this as a victory. So Clara told a small story about a winter bird too stubborn to fly south, and because she told it plainly, without trying to charm or impress, the girls listened harder. Even Elias listened, though he kept his face turned toward the fire. The bird survived not by strength, but by learning where warmth gathered when the world looked bare, under wagon eaves, near bakery chimneys, in the lee of church walls. It was a child's tale, simple. But there was a hardened shape beneath it that made the room go still. When she finished, Lucy asked, "Did somebody tell you that one?" "Yes." "Who?" Clara folded the stocking slowly. "Someone who wanted me to remember there's always a place out of the wind. You just have to see it before dark." No one spoke after that. The girls went to bed quieter than usual, as if the story had given them something too delicate to carry loud. Later, when the lamps were low, Elias found Clara at the back door, not opening it, just standing with one hand on the latch. "You hear something again?" he asked. She let go at once. "No." "Then why stand there like that?" She drew a breath. "Sometimes if I know where the exits are, I sleep easier." The words landed without adornment, not dramatic, not asking pity, simply true. Elias looked at the door, then at her. Something in his chest tightened with a slow, unwelcome heat. He knew men who made women memorize exits, knew the kind of fear that taught itself into the body until safety started feeling like a trick. "You're safe here," he said, and heard at once how thin such words could sound to someone who had survived on promises already broken. She gave a small nod anyway. "I know you mean that." It was not the same as belief. Days settled into a rhythm neither of them named. Clara rose before dawn, banked the fire, set water to boil, moved through the kitchen with that same careful economy that wasted nothing, not steps, not words, not trust. Elias handled the livestock and the winter prep, spoke when needed, withdrew when not. Anna watched everything. Lucy forgot herself more easily now, bringing Clara odd treasures from around the house. A blue button, a ribbon end, a tin star fallen from an old Christmas box, as if trying to learn whether grown women could be tethered by small offerings. Clara never turned these gestures into claims. That was the strange mercy of her. She did not enter the girls' room unless invited, did not brush their hair without asking, did not sit in the chair their mother once favored. Even when she laughed once, softly, unexpectedly, at Lucy's solemn attempt to teach the cat to pray before supper, it was followed by a quick glance toward Elias, as though seeking permission to have taken up that much air. Her restraint built more trust than warmth alone could have done. One afternoon, Anna brought her a torn doll dress from a drawer no one had opened in months. "I don't want it fixed if it can't be fixed right," she said, voice nearly stern with the risk of asking. Clara examined the seam, the frayed collar, the ripped hem. "Then I'd better do it right." Anna hovered while she worked, pretending to sort buttons nearby. After several minutes she said, without looking up, "Mama used to hum when she sewed." Clara's needle paused once. "Did she?" Anna nodded, only when she was thinking. Clara resumed the seam. A moment later, under her breath and so faint it might have vanished if the room had been any louder, she began to hum. Anna went very still. From the doorway, Elias saw the child's face change, not with grief exactly, though grief was there, but with the painful relief of recognition. Something old brushing past without tearing the whole wound open. He stepped back before either of them noticed him. Outside on the porch, he stood staring at the yard until the cold bit through his coat. That evening he took longer than necessary putting the stock in. Night had settled by the time he returned, the sky iron black, stars hard as nails. Inside, the house glowed with low lamplight and something stranger, a sense of enclosure that did not feel like entrapment. It bothered him because it soothed him. He removed his gloves slowly, listening, not silence, the clink of dishes being stacked, Lucy whispering something, Clara answering too softly to catch. Anna shushing them both, though not with any real force. He entered the kitchen and found Clara at the stove, the girls drying cups beside her, not helping much, mostly being there. All three looked up at once. The sight hit him harder than any memory had in months, because it was not memory at all. It was the present, alive, reaching. He set his hat on the peg. "Snow by morning," he said. Anna went to the window. "How can you tell?" "They're changed." Lucy frowned as though he'd cheated. Clara glanced toward the dark outside. "Then, I'll set another blanket out." "For who?" he almost asked, then saw her meaning. The girls, always the girls first. Supper passed with small exchanges that would have meant nothing to another house and everything to this one. Lucy told him the hen with the crooked claw had pecked her boot. Anna corrected her description of the hen's temperament. Clara asked if the south trough froze faster than the north one. Elias answered before realizing he'd fallen into the ease of being consulted. Their eyes met briefly over the table. "Hers lowered first." Later, after the girls had been tucked in, Clara lingered near the stove, rubbing warmth back into her fingers. Elias poured 2 cups of coffee because the pot was there and because not doing it had started to feel deliberate in ways he was tired of defending. He handed her one. She accepted it with a quiet thanks. For a while, they stood in the same room without filling it. Then he said, "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder every time the boards creak." "No. No." She studied the dark surface of the coffee. Some habits don't wait for permission. He leaned one shoulder against the mantel. "Who taught you those habits?" The question should have been too much. He knew it before the words settled, but she did not retreat. She only grew still in a different way, like a person deciding how much truth the air could bear. "Life," she said first. He let the unsatisfying answer sit. After a moment she added, "And a man who liked obedience better than conversation." That was all, yet it was enough to sharpen the entire world around him. The stove crackled. Wind worried the eaves. Somewhere down the hall Lucy turned in sleep. Elias felt an old hardness move through him, not the dead weight he had carried since burial, but something with direction. "He won't step onto this land," he said. Clara's mouth tightened faintly, not in disbelief, not exactly, more like someone hearing a vow she did not trust herself to need. "I didn't ask you for that." "No," he said, "you did." She looked at him then, properly looked, and in her face he saw the same recognition he had seen at the gate, not of safety, of cost, of what it might mean if one wounded life began to lean toward another. So she set the cup down before it was empty and said softly, "I'm here for winter, nothing more." There it was, the terms spoken at last. Temporary, manageable, safe in the way walls are safe because they admit no future through them. Elias nodded once. That was the understanding. But after she had gone to her room and the house lay still again, he remained in the kitchen a long time, staring at the chair she had used and the half-mended towel folded near the lamp. The house was warmer. The girls breathed easier in their sleep. Even the cat had taken to curling by the stove before dark, as if it too sensed the return of steadier order. Temporary, he told himself. She stayed through winter. The snow came, then it ended, then she went, simple enough. Yet when he rose before dawn and found the coffee already set out, the fire banked right, and one of Lucy's mittens repaired so neatly the tear had vanished into the seam, that word began to feel less like a fact, and more like a lie men tell themselves when hope grows where they did not plant it. The first real snow fell 2 nights later. By morning the ranch lay under a clean white hush that softened every fence line and roof edge. Lucy pressed both palms to the window and gasped as if winter had been invented overnight. Anna tried to act older than wonder, then forgot and ran for her boots. Clara laughed, only once, only lightly, but the sound followed them all morning. Elias spent half the day breaking ice, checking the cattle, and clearing the path from house to barn. When he returned, cold to the bone and white with blown powder, he stopped in the doorway. The girls were asleep on the settee by the stove. One had her head against Clara's shoulder. The other had curled near her side, both small hands tangled in the borrowed sleeve of Clara's dress, as if sleep itself had reached out and fastened them there. Clara had dozed too, chin lowered, one arm curved loosely around the girls without possessiveness, without even seeming to know she'd done it. The room was very quiet, not empty. Quiet in the way a heart goes quiet when it is listening to something it has missed too long. Elias stood unmoving, snow melting from his coat onto the floorboards. Something shifted in him then, small enough not to break the shell around his grief, strong enough to crack it, not hope. He refused the word at once, but the emptiness had stepped back, and in the space it left behind, something dangerous had entered. Not love, not yet. Only the unbearable possibility that this house, hollowed and starved and stripped down to survival, might remember how to live before winter was through. The first sign came without sound, not hoofbeats, not shouting, not some hard-faced rider cutting across the yard with trouble in his shadow. It came as a change in Clara. Elias noticed it on a Wednesday morning when the frost still clung to the trough rims and the girls were arguing softly over which shawl belonged to whom. Clara had been kneading dough at the table, sleeves rolled, flour on her wrists, her face quieter than usual but not troubled. Then something shifted, just slightly. A stillness beneath the stillness. She turned her head toward the window, though nothing moved outside but pale light over snow. "What is it?" Elias asked. Her hands resumed at once. Nothing. But it was not nothing. By afternoon, she had checked the back latch twice. By evening, 3 times. She folded the girls' coats and laid them nearer the door than before. At supper, she startled when Anna dropped a spoon. At bedtime, she stood in the hallway longer than needed, watching the dark at both ends as if choosing which direction danger might prefer. Elias saw all of it, said nothing. The next morning, he rode into town for seed, lamp oil, and a length of harness, leather the merchant had promised to hold for him. Snowmelt had turned the road to rutted grey slush, and the wind cut low through his coat. Town looked, as it always did in winter, duller, meaner, more honest. Men stood outside the feed store speaking through collars turned high against the cold. Wagons creaked past with wheels half-caked in mud. Smoke hung low above the roofs. He had just tied his horse outside the general store when old Mercer, who sold nails, tobacco, and whatever else a person had forgotten they needed, stepped out onto the porch and squinted at him. "Boone." Elias nodded. Mercer rubbed his jaw. "You talkin' in drifters now." The question was too casual. That alone made Elias wary. "I hire who I need." Mercer looked past him toward the street, then back. Man was askin' around this morning, well-dressed for this weather, too polished for honest work, wanted to know if anybody had seen a woman travelin' alone, said she was about so high. He held a hand level, dark hair, wore poor clothes, but not born to him by the sound of it. Elias' expression did not change. Mercer kept talking because men in small towns treated silence like an invitation to make themselves useful. Didn't say her name at first, just smiled, that kind of smile that don't reach the eyes. Then he laid a silver dollar on the counter and asked again. "What name did he use?" Elias asked. "None I heard, but he talked like he expected answers, like askin' was a courtesy, not a need." Elias looked toward the far end of the street. There, near the hotel porch, stood a man he had never seen before, tall, broad through the coat but soft in the way of men whose strength came from money and hired hands rather than labor, gloves too fine for ranch work, hat brim clean, boots polished despite the mud. He was speaking to the barber, leaning slightly as though the whole town were beneath the trouble of standing straight for it. Then the stranger turned. Even across the street, Elias felt it, that particular kind of regard some men carried, not curiosity, assessment, the look of a man who believed the world sorted itself into owned things and temporary inconveniences. The stranger's gaze rested on Elias only a second, then moved on. Mercer spat over the porch rail. "You know him?" "No." But Elias bought the harness leather, the lamp oil, the seed, and left town faster than planned. The ride home felt longer. Cold air burned the inside of his lungs. Twice he told himself he was making more of it than needed. A stranger asking questions did not make him a threat. A polished coat did not mean danger. Clara had a past. Every person did. It was no concern of his unless it crossed his land. Yet when the ranch came into view and he saw smoke rising from the chimney in one steady line, relief hit him too quickly to be denied. Clara was at the pump when he rode in. Lucy beside her, trying and failing to help. The child looked up first and waved. Clara turned at the motion. Whatever she saw in his face drained the color from hers. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough. Elias dismounted, took the sacks from the horse, and set them near the porch. Lucy ran to tell Anna he had brought sugar, because children could sense such things through canvas and leather. That left the yard briefly empty except for Clara, the pump, and the silence gathering between them. There was a man in town, Elias said. Her hand slipped on the pump handle. He caught it before it clanged hard enough to wake the whole place. For a moment neither of them moved. Then she pulled her hand back. "What kind of man?" she asked, though the question was too careful to be innocent. Looked like he never carried his own trouble. Elias watched her face. "Ask about you." She stared past him toward the fence line. The wind lifted a strand of hair loose from her scarf. Did he give a name? No. That was answer enough. Clara closed her eyes once. When she opened them, something behind them had gone remote and tired, as if a long road had suddenly unrolled again beneath her feet. "I should have kept going," she said softly. Elias' jaw tightened. "That depends who he is." Her mouth parted, closed again. Then she bent for the water bucket, though it was already full. "A man who doesn't like being denied." "That all?" She lifted the bucket with both hands, too fast. Water sloshed over the rim, for now. She carried it toward the house before he could stop her. Inside, she changed over the next 2 days in ways small enough to deny if named and large enough to fill every room. She did not hum when she sewed. She no longer laughed when Lucy said something solemn and misplaced. She began sleeping in her dress. At night, Elias heard her floorboards more often, not pacing, listening. Once he found the kitchen knife moved from the drawer to the shelf above the stove where a quicker hand could reach it. Another time he noticed she had placed the girls' boots together by the front door, ready, as if fire or flight might come before dawn and there'd be no time to search. The girls felt the shift even if they did not understand it. Lucy began following Clara more closely, pressing against her side whenever the older woman paused too long near a window. Anna grew sharper, quieter. She asked no direct questions, but she watched Clara the way a child watches a sky that has gone strangely still before a storm. By Saturday, the fragile ease of the house had thinned into caution. At supper, Clara barely ate. "You're tired," Anna said at last, trying to make it sound like observation rather than worry. "I'm well enough." Lucy frowned at her bowl. "You say that when you're not." Clara gave a faint smile that did not hold. "Do I?" Lucy nodded seriously. Elias set down his spoon. If there's something common at my house, I'd like to hear it before it gets here. The room quieted at once. Anna looked between them. Lucy froze with bread in her hand. Clara folded her napkin, though she had hardly used it. Not tonight. The answer was calm, too calm. That made Elias angrier than refusal would have. Tonight's when we're sittin' at the same table. And they're listening, she said, eyes flicking toward the girls. He almost said they were always listening. That silence and guesswork often frightened children worse than truth. But the look on Clara's face stopped him, not because it asked mercy, but because it held the strain of a person keeping terror folded small enough not to spill. So he said nothing more. Later, after the girls were asleep, he found her on the porch wrapped in a shawl against the cold. Snow had begun again, light flakes, drifting slow under a moon blurred by cloud. She stood at the railing, looking past the yard toward the road that disappeared between black pines. "You'll freeze out here," he said. "I know." "Then come in." "Not yet." Elias stepped beside her, close enough to share the wind, not close enough to touch. Below them the yard lay pale and still, every fence post tipped with white. It looked like peace from a distance. He knew better. "He your husband?" he asked finally. "No." "I promised to you." Her answer came after too long, something like that. "That ain't the same." "No," her voice thinned. "It is." He waited. She did not continue. At last he said, "I won't ask you to tell me more than you can, but I won't have danger brought here blind either." She bowed her head. "That's why I should leave." The words hit him harder than expected, because he had seen them coming, because some part of him had known from the moment Mercer spoke that any threat attached to Clara would turn inward first. She would not cling, would not plead for shelter. She would be the one to step back, to shrink her own place in the house before anyone could demand it of her. "You don't know that Levin fixes it," he said. "It keeps it from being your daughter's burden." There it was, not fear for herself, for them. Elias looked out across the white yard, thought of Lucy asleep clutching the rag doll Clara had repaired, thought of Anna pretending not to wait for the soft knock Clara gave before entering their room at bedtime, thought of the warmth in the kitchen now, the order, the steadiness, the dangerous return of ordinary things. "You leavin' now would hurt them too," he said. Her eyes closed briefly. "A little hurt now is kinder than what comes if he reaches this place." He turned to her fully. She drew a breath that trembled only at the end. "I never told him yes, no matter what he says. Remember that." Then she went inside before he could answer. The next man to bring trouble came on Monday, not the polished stranger himself. Another one, a local ranch hand Elias knew by sight, named Dugan, thick-necked and not bright enough to hide when he'd been sent for a purpose. He rode up near noon while Anna and Lucy were shelling beans at the table and Clara was hanging linens by the stove to dry. Elias met him in the yard. Dugan stayed mounted. "Man in town asked me where the Boone place sits." "And you told him?" Dugan shrugged. "Whole county knows where you live." Elias stepped closer to the horse. "What man?" "Said he was looking for a woman under his protection." The phrase made Elias' face go flat. Dugan shifted in the saddle, suddenly less certain of his errand. "Name of Whitaker, Silas Whitaker. Out of Santa Fe, I think, maybe farther east before that. Carries money like it's proof of character. Told me to say he'd call proper in a day or two." "Did he?" "Said a woman answering Clara Hale may be staying here. Said there's been a misunderstanding." Elias stared until Dugan's horse sidestepped. Then he said, "Ride back and tell him misunderstandings get cleared by invitation." Dugan licked his lips. "That the message? That's the message." When Elias turned, Clara was standing in the doorway. She had heard enough. Her hand gripped the frame so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Silas Whitaker," Elias said once Dugan had gone. She looked past him at the road, as if seeing not the ranch but another place altogether. "Yes." "Who is he?" Her voice came low, steady by force. "A man with influence, property, friends in offices where doors close before women are heard." "That don't tell me what he is to you." She met his eyes then, and he saw the thing beneath all the silence at last, not only fear, but shame that did not belong to her and had been laid on her anyway. "He intended to marry me." Elias' expression did not change. "Intended," he repeated. "He arranged it," she said, "or thought he had." Something old and cold moved through Elias. "Without your say." A humorless breath escaped her. "My say was treated like a temper to be corrected." Inside the house, a bean pan tipped. Lucy must have startled. Anna shushed her quickly. Clara heard it and visibly gathered herself, pulling the fear inward again so the girls would not have to see the full shape of it. "I should pack," she said. Elias' shoulders squared. "You're not running today." "It won't stop with today." "No, but today you stay." She flinched, not at his tone, but at the strength in it, as though she had not expected anyone to say stay once the cost became clear. That afternoon she withdrew in ways that cut sharper because they were deliberate. She stopped letting Lucy hand her clothespins or stir the pot. She answered Anna's questions with kindness, but never with stories. When the girls tried to sit near her by the stove, she found errands elsewhere. It did not take long for the children to feel the wall rising. By evening, Lucy's lower lip had begun that quiver she hated in herself. Anna, proud enough to resent confusion, cornered Elias while he was stacking wood near the back step. "Did we do something wrong?" "He turned too fast." "What?" With Clara, Anna folded her arms, trying to hold herself together with posture alone. "She keeps looking at us like she's leaving." The directness of it left him no room to pretend. "No," he said, "you girls didn't do a thing wrong." "Then why is she acting like the house belongs to ghosts again?" For a second, he nearly answered with more truth than she was old enough to carry. Instead, he said, "Sometimes grown trouble shows up, and folks think distance makes it smaller." Anna looked toward the kitchen window, where Clara's shadow moved back and forth in lamplight. "It does." "No." Anna nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. Then she went inside. That night the house held no warmth he could trust. Clara kept to practical words, Elias to fewer. The girls ate quietly. Lucy finally asked, "Is somebody coming?" The question hung there. Clara set down her fork. "Maybe." "Do we know them?" "No." "Then I don't want them here." Anna whispered, "Lucy." But Clara reached across the table and covered the child's hand with her own, only for a moment, only enough to steady her. "Neither do I." It should have comforted the room. Instead, it made the fear real. Whitaker came the following afternoon. He did not ride in like a brute. That would have been simpler. He arrived in a dark coat with a silver watch chain visible beneath the lapel and two men a little way behind him who did not pretend to be companions. He dismounted slowly, looking over the ranch with the mild approval of a man inspecting property he might someday acquire. Elias met him halfway between the porch and the gate. The dogs were already uneasy, low in their throats. Whitaker removed his gloves one finger at a time. "Mr. Boone, I presume." "You presume enough for both of us." A faint smile. "I was told you were plain-spoken. And I was told you ask after women that don't want findin'." Whitaker glanced toward the house. "Miss Hale and I have unfinished business." "Then finish it somewhere else." The smile stayed, but cooled. "I appreciate your concern. She left in distress. I bear her no ill will." Elias did not move. Behind the curtain, he knew Clara would be standing rigid, hearing every word. Whitaker went on, voice smooth as polished wood. "She was under my protection. I took an interest in her future. In return, she mistook kindness for confinement." Elias' eyes hardened. "Funny thing about kindness, women don't usually run from it in winter." Whitaker's gaze sharpened at last. "There, the steel under the civility. You are speaking on a matter you do not understand." "Then enlighten me." Whitaker stepped closer by half a pace. "I offered her a name, security, a home finer than anything she has known. She was to be my wife." "Was to be," Elias repeated. The man's jaw shifted. "Her refusal was temporary." The front door opened. Both men turned. Clara stood on the porch, pale but straight, one hand braced on the frame. Anna and Lucy were behind her, just visible, not because she allowed it, but because children move toward truth even when frightened of it. Whitaker's whole face changed when he saw her, not softened, claimed. "Clara." He spoke her name as if reaching for a collar. "There you are." She did not descend the steps. "You were told to leave." He ignored the words entirely. "You've embarrassed yourself enough. Come down." Elias took one step toward the porch without looking back. A line drawn. Whitaker noticed and smiled thinly. "Ah, so that is the arrangement." Clara's fingers tightened on the doorframe. "There is no arrangement." "No." Whitaker let his gaze travel to the girls behind her. "Then, perhaps, you have found a more convenient bargain. I wondered what would make a woman forget gratitude so quickly." The insult struck the whole yard. Anna stiffened. Lucy shrank against Clara's skirt. Elias felt something dark rise behind his ribs, but he held it. "Careful," he said. Whitaker looked amused. "Or what?" "Or you'll find this yard less patient than town was." For the first time, one of the men behind Whitaker shifted forward. Just a fraction, hired muscles scenting the edge of violence. Clara spoke before it could move further. "Sealers, leave." He returned his attention to her, and his tone changed again, velvet over wire. "You are frightened. I understand. Rural life encourages delusions of independence. But you were never meant for this." His gaze flicked to the house. "This little widow's burden, these children, this dirt." Elias' fists closed. Whitaker continued. "Come with me now, and I will consider the spectacle ended." Clara did not answer, did not deny him, did not explain. She only stood there, silent, white-faced, with fear and something worse moving beneath it. Whitaker took her silence for leverage. "You know what happens if I choose to insist." That was when Elias understood he would get no full truth from Whitaker without filth attached to it. Yet he had heard enough. Force dressed as provision, control called marriage, a future arranged like a pen. He looked back at Clara. "Is any of what he's claimin' yours?" he asked. Her lips parted. No sound came. Whitaker cut in smoothly. She was taken in, fed, clothed, and offered respectability. Miss Hale has always confused mercy for oppression." Clara flinched as if struck. Elias did not take his eyes off her. "I asked you." The yard went still. Anna stared from the doorway. Lucy's breathing had turned sharp and shallow. Clara's voice, when it came, was barely above the wind. He offered what men call safety when they mean obedience. Whittaker's expression hardened completely. "You ungrateful little fool." The girls heard that. He had made the mistake. Elias stepped forward once and the whole air changed. "You leave," he said. "No raise in volume, no wasted heat, just finality. Now." Whittaker held his ground, another second too long. Then he laughed softly, as if only he understood how temporary ranch courage was against the broader machinery of wealth and reputation. "This is not finished, Boone." Elias answered, "It is for today." Whittaker put his gloves back on. "She will come to understand she has no better choice." Then he turned, mounted, and rode out with the two men behind him, slow enough to insult on purpose. Only when the road swallowed them did anyone breathe proper again. Clara swayed once where she stood. Lucy began crying at last, not loud, just brokenly. Anna put one arm around her and looked toward Clara with a hurt fiercer than fear. "Why did he talk like that?" Anna asked. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. She had no answer that could spare them. That evening the house held fear openly for the first time. Not the old grief fear of empty chairs and remembered voices. A new one, active, waiting, capable of crossing miles. Clara packed after supper. She did it carefully, as if each folded dress and wrapped comb might keep the room from noticing. Her satchel lay open on the bed, the same satchel Elias had lifted by the door when she first arrived. Still too light. He found her there with her back half turned. "So that's it," he said. She did not startle. She had been listening for him already. "He'll come back." "Yes. And next time, he won't stop at words." "You don't know that." She turned then, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I know men like him better than you do." Maybe that was true, maybe not. Elias did know certain kinds of men who believed there will become law in any room they entered, men who used money where fists looked crude, men who let others do ugly work and called themselves clean. But Clara was speaking from the inside of that knowledge, and he could not follow her there. "You leave tonight, he follows you alone," Elias said. "If I stay, he comes here with reason." "His reason ain't mine." "No," her voice broke at last, "only a little, but the cost might still be." She looked past him toward the hall where the girls' small voices rose and fell, too quiet now, trying not to hear. "I can't be the thing that brings danger through your door," she whispered. Elias had no answer ready because the cruelest part was that she was already more than that. She was the one who had brought life back through it too. Before he could speak, Lucy appeared in the doorway. No one had heard her coming. Her face crumpled at the sight of the packed bag. "You're leaving." It was not a question. Clara crossed the room at once and knelt, but Lucy backed away, tears spilling fast and hot. No, you said maybe, you didn't say now." Anna stood behind her, pale with fury, held too tight for a child. Clara reached for words and found none that would not sound like abandonment. "It's safer if I go," she said finally. "For who?" Anna asked. The room went silent. Because children, when hurt enough, walk straight through the soft lying adults use to protect themselves. Clara bowed her head. Lucy's crying turned raw. "Please don't go, please, I'll be good. I won't ask stories. I won't follow you in the kitchen. Please don't go." The words hit Elias like a blow. Clara was crying now too, though quietly, trying to gather Lucy without forcing her. "This isn't because of you." Then stay, Lucy sobbed. Mama stayed. Anna shut her eyes hard, as if the line had torn out of her before she could stop it. Everything in the room seemed to fold around that grief. Clara's face went white with pain. Elias stood at the threshold, motionless, because stepping further meant more than comfort. It meant choosing a side in a fight he had not invited. It meant opening the old locked chamber in himself, where action lived, the part that had gone still after burial, after loss, after deciding endurance was safer than love and isolation, safer than risk. Clara looked up at him over Lucy's bent head. She did not ask him to stop her, did not ask him to defend her. The decision was still being laid at her own feet, as if she were the one who must carry all of it. Anna whispered, fierce and trembling, "If you let—" Elias did not speak when Lucy's crying finally broke into exhausted hiccups, and Anna turned her face away so no one would see the tears standing in her own eyes. He did not tell Clara to stay. He did not tell her to go. He only looked once at the satchel on the bed, then at the two girls clinging to the woman who had brought warmth back into their house and fear into it too, and something in him settled hard and cold. Not confusion, decision. He stepped back from the doorway and crossed the hall without a word. Clara called his name once, softly, not to stop him, but because she felt the change before she understood it. He kept moving. In his room he took down the rifle, checked it with the practiced efficiency of a man who did not worship weapons and did not fumble with them either, then shrugged into his coat and reached for his hat. When he entered the kitchen, Anna stood there waiting. "Where are you going?" she asked. He pulled on his gloves, to finish what should have been finished before he reached this house. Fear flickered over her face, then pride, then fear again. She was still a child. It all had to live in the same small body. "Will you come back?" He held her eyes. "Yes." He did not say whole, did not say soon, only yes, because that was the word she needed and the only one he had any right to give. Clara came down the hall with Lucy in her arms. The child's face was blotched, her fingers still twisted in Clara's sleeve. Clara had not taken time to wipe her tears. Elias saw that and loved her a little for it before he had even let himself use the word. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes," he answered, "I do. This is my past. It stepped onto my porch." She flinched, but not from the sharpness, from the truth of it. "Sealers won't fight fair. I'm not riding out for fairness. For revenge, then." He shook his head once, for a line. Something moved across her face then, not relief, something sadder and stronger, a kind of understanding that hurt to receive because it arrived too late to spare anyone from change. "You think drawing a line will stop him?" she asked. "No," Elias said. "But it'll tell him what happens if he crosses it." He walked toward the door. Lucy twisted in Clara's arms and reached for him blindly, needing something steadier than grief to hold onto. "Don't leave too," she whispered. Elias touched the top of her head, awkward and brief, because tenderness had never come easy to his hands. "I'm coming back." Then he stepped into the cold. The ride into town was hard and clean. Dawn had not yet fully lifted, and the sky stretched iron gray over snow-crusted pasture. The horses' breath smoked in front of them. Elias rode without hurry because hurry wasted strength, and because what he meant to do had nothing to do with temper. He had spent too many years living as a man who absorbed pain by going still, by enduring, by mistaking numbness for peace. That life had nearly become a habit strong enough to bury him alive. But now the stillness had broken, not into recklessness, into purpose. By the time he reached town, the streets were waking. A wagon rolled past the feed store. A boy shoveled slush away from the hotel steps. Smoke lifted from chimneys in low, dark ribbons. Elias tied his horse outside the hotel and went in through the front, boots leaving thawed prints on the wood floor. Whittaker sat in the dining room with coffee, gloves laid neatly beside his plate, as though he had all the time in the world and the right to use it where he pleased. One of his men stood near the stove, the other by the window. Whittaker looked up and smiled, but there was no ease left in it now. "Mr. Boone, early for social calling." Elias stopped at the edge of the room, outside. Whittaker leaned back in his chair. "I'm at breakfast." "Then you'd best finish fast." A few of the other men in the room had gone quiet. They were pretending not to listen in the way townsmen do when they know very well they are about to hear something worth carrying. Whittaker lifted his cup. "You strike me as the kind of man who mistakes threat for authority." "No," Elias' voice remained level. "I'm the kind who knows the difference. That's why I'm asking once." Whittaker set the cup down. The two hired men straightened, reading the room. "And if I decline?" Elias looked from one to the other, then back to him. "Then you'll test whether hired hands make a man braver or only louder." A faint line appeared beside Whittaker's mouth. He had expected resistance perhaps, not certainty, not from a rancher whose coat still held stable dust and winter mud. At last he stood, outside, the cold bit sharp enough to make every word clearer. A few townspeople slowed without seeming to. Mercer drifted onto his porch. The barber stopped sweeping. Even the hotel clerk came to the doorway under the pretense of shaking a rug. Whittaker buttoned his coat. "Let us be plain then. You're attached to a situation that is not yours." Elias faced him squarely in the street. "No, she's attached to it. I'm telling you it ends." Whittaker gave a short laugh. "She told you some sorrowful version, I'm sure. Women do have a talent for reshaping obligation into suffering." Elias did not move. "You'll speak of her respectful or not at all?" "What exactly is she to you, Boone?" Whittaker asked. "A servant, a convenience, a dead woman's shadow with warm hands." The insult landed where it was aimed, and Whittaker must have seen something alter in Elias' eyes because the smile he wore tightened. But Elias did not lunge, did not shout. That would have made the matter common. Instead, he stepped one pace closer and said, "She is under my roof by her own choice. My girls sleep easier because of her. My house stands better because of her. And you will not drag her from it with papers, money, or fear, not while I draw breath." Whittaker's expression flattened. Bold words for a widower playing at rescue. "I'm not rescuing anyone," Elias said. "I'm refusing you." For the first time, silence spread fully around them. Whittaker understood something then, that this would not be handled privately, that Elias had chosen the street on purpose, chosen witnesses, chosen daylight, not because he sought spectacle, but because men like Whittaker thrived where things stayed behind doors and could be named later to suit themselves. Whittaker's gaze hardened. "You are interfering in a lawful arrangement." "Lawful," Elias repeated. "A woman says no and runs in winter. You call that lawful, I call it enough." Whittaker's voice cooled to a blade. "You overestimate how much a woman's refusal matters when contracts are concerned." Several men heard that clearly. Mercer's head lifted. The barber stopped pretending to fuss with the broom. Elias let the words stand in the open. Then he said, "Say that again, louder. Let the whole street hear what kind of gentleman you are." Whittaker realized too late what had happened. In trying to diminish Clara, he had stripped the polish from himself. The town was listening now not for gossip, but for judgment. One of Whitaker's men shifted nearer. Elias saw it and turned his head just enough. "You move for me, you answer to me first." The man hesitated. Whitaker, furious at being cornered by witness rather than force, stepped closer himself. "You think your little county matters? I can have a deputy here by tomorrow. I can produce letters, names, support. I can say she is unstable, indebted, ungrateful. I can ruin what standing she has left." Elias looked at him as if measuring a fence post before deciding where to drive the nail. "Do that, and I'll still be standing where you find me. You'd risk your daughter's safety for a woman you barely know." The question might have cut once, before, when Elias still believed caution and withdrawal were the same as fatherhood, but now he heard the rot in it. "I'd risk myself," he said. "That's what you never understood." Whitaker's mouth thinned. "You cannot protect everyone." "No," Elias answered, "just the ones in my care." Then Whitaker made his mistake. He reached, not for a weapon, not even quite for Elias, but fast enough and with enough contempt to break the line between threat and action. Elias caught his wrist in one clean motion and twisted it down hard enough to stop him without breaking bone. Whitaker gasped and half stumbled. The street froze. The hired men started forward. Elias looked at them over Whitaker's shoulder with such flat certainty that they halted. "Listen careful," Elias said, not raising his voice. "You come to my ranch again without invitation, I stop you at the gate. You speak to her like she's owned, I answer it. You frighten my girls, I forget every courtesy I've shown today." Whitaker's face had gone mottled with pain and humiliation. "Take your hand off me." "Leave the county." "Oh, what?" Elias released him with a shove sharp enough to send him back a step. "Or next time, you won't have a crowd to soften what happens." Whitaker regained his footing and looked around. At Mercer, at the barber, at the men emerging from the mercantile, at the clerk in the doorway. He saw what they had all seen, not a romantic quarrel, not a runaway servant dragged home, but a man claiming too much and being denied in public. His authority had cracked. He pulled himself upright, dignity reassembled from scraps. "This is not over." Elias answered, "It is here." Whitaker stared a moment longer, hatred now too visible to disguise. Then he snapped at his men, mounted, and rode out of town without looking back. Not because he was beaten in the larger world. Men like him often were not. But because this smaller world had refused the shape he tried to force onto it, and for now that refusal was enough. The street remained still after he was gone. Then Mercer spat into the slush and said, for all to hear, "If that's how he courts, I can see why the lady ran." A few hard, low laughs followed, not mocking Clara, mocking him, and with that the balance shifted fully. Elias mounted and rode home under a sky beginning to clear. He found Clara in the yard near the clothesline, though no wash hung there. She had been waiting long enough for cold to redden her hands. Anna stood on the porch beside Lucy, both girls silent in the particular way that meant they had been listening for hoofbeats from the moment he left. When Elias swung down from the saddle, Clara searched his face first for blood, then for damage, then for whatever came after violence. Finding none of it seemed to unsettle her more. "Well," she asked, "he's gone." "For now." "For now," Elias agreed. "And when he left town, he left with everybody knowing what he is." Clara's breath caught slightly. "What did you do?" "Told the truth, where people could hear it." She looked at him a long moment. "That's all." "No," he took off his gloves slowly. "I also made it plain he won't set foot here again." Lucy broke first. She flew off the porch and threw herself against Elia's side so hard he had to brace to keep from stumbling. He rested a hand on her shoulder awkwardly, then more surely when she would not let go. Anna came down the steps with more restraint, but her eyes shone with a fierce relief she was too old to display carelessly and too young to hide well. Clara remained where she was, not distant. Not exactly, but stunned in the quiet way people are when the worst thing they expected does not arrive, and their body does not yet know what to do with the absence. "He'll hate you for this," she said. Elias looked at her over Lucy's bent head. "Then he'll have to carry the burden of it." That evening the house did not return to normal, because houses never do that after fear enters them. But something steadier took hold. The girls spoke above a whisper again. Clara ate more than 3 bites. Elias mended a latch by lamplight, while Anna read aloud and Lucy corrected details in the story she had no authority to improve. Twice Clara caught herself looking toward the window at a passing sound. Twice she forced her hands still. The third time, Elias simply said, "He won't come tonight." She nodded, and because the words had been earned in action, not offered as comfort, she believed him enough to sleep. 2 days later, the reckoning came proper. Whittaker had not left the county after all. Pride would not allow it. Instead, he had gone to the deputy, to the hotel ledger, to anyone he thought might lend his complaint a firmer shape. By noon, word had spread that he meant to challenge the matter openly in town, claiming Clara had fled an honorable arrangement and been concealed unlawfully at the Boone Ranch. Elias might once have ignored such talk and stayed behind his fences, but hiding would hand Whittaker the ground he wanted. So on Friday he hitched the wagon and told Anna and Lucy to put on their good coats. Clara looked up from the table where she had been sorting dried beans. No. It was the first time she had spoken to him with anything near command. He met her eyes. "Yes. This is enough humiliation without making a procession of it." "It ain't humiliation if it's truth." She stood. "Towns don't protect women, they inspect them." He felt the weight of that, knew it for true in more places than not. "Maybe," he said, "but they also remember what they see, and I'd rather they see you standin' than hear him speak for you." Her mouth tightened. "You ask a lot." "No," his voice gentled, though only slightly. "I'm askin' whether you'll choose to be there, that's different." The room held still around them. Anna pretended not to listen from the corner by the stove. Lucy did not pretend at all. At last Clara sat back down slowly, her hands folded in her lap. "If I go, I will speak for myself." "That's the point." They rode into town beneath a pale sky with the last hard crusts of winter beginning to soften at the edges. Snow still shadowed the fence lines, but water ran under it now. The road was rutted and wet. Lucy sat close against Clara under the blanket in the wagon seat, Anna beside Elias, upright and watchful. By the time they reached town, half the place seemed to know why they had come. Men stood outside the mercantile. Women paused near the dressmaker's window. The deputy waited in front of the hotel with the cautious expression of a man who disliked trouble, unless it arrived tied to paperwork. Whittaker stood nearby in dark clothes, clean and controlled again, but the town's regard had shifted since the street encounter. People looked at him now with interest edged by doubt. Elias helped Clara down from the wagon. His hand at her waist lasted only a moment, but the steadiness of it ran through her. She straightened, lifted her chin. Anna and Lucy came down after, one on each side of her before either child thought better of it. Whittaker saw that, saw the girls cling to her without shame. Saw Elias stand beside her openly, whatever speech he had prepared altered behind his eyes. The deputy cleared his throat. Mr. Whittaker claims Miss Hale is bound to return with him under prior agreement. Mr. Boone disputes his right to compel her. Best settle it plain. Whittaker spoke first, of course. Men like him always did. He talked of assistance offered, debts assumed, plans made. He used words like guardianship and understanding and future. He never once used force, never once used refusal. He dressed coercion in lace and called it law. The town listened. Then the deputy turned to Clara. "Miss Hale, did you leave Mr. Whittaker's household of your own accord?" "Yes." "Were you under contract of marriage?" Whittaker cut in smoothly. "She was verbally pledged." The deputy lifted a hand. "I asked her." Clara's fingers tightened once on Lucy's shoulder, then loosened. "No," she said, clear enough to carry. "I was told my refusal did not matter. That is not the same." A murmur moved through the crowd. Whittaker's jaw flexed. "You were sheltered, fed, protected." Clara turned to him then, and Elias felt the entire town lean closer. "Protected," she repeated. "You locked doors when I displeased you, dismissed the maid who tried to help me write letters, told me gratitude would cure my stubbornness. You chose my dresses before I agreed to wear your name. You called that care because you preferred not to call it control." Silence. No one laughed. No one coughed. The whole street had gone still enough to hear a wagon chain clink 2 storefronts away. Whittaker made one last attempt at dignity. "You are emotional, confused by rustic sympathies." "No," Clara said, "I am finally believed." The words landed like a hammer. The deputy looked from her to Whittaker and back again, measuring not merely the claim, but the weight of public truth. "If there's no legal document," he said slowly, "and the lady states she left by choice, then there is no basis to force her." Whittaker flushed. "You would take the word of a runaway woman over mine." Before the deputy could answer, Elias did. "I'd take hers over yours in any room I ever stood in." Whittaker turned on him with open contempt at last. "And what are you to her, Boone? Another man deciding what choice means." The question might have strung once. Now it clarified. Elias looked at Clara first. Only Clara. Then he faced the street and said, "I'm the man standing beside her while she speaks for herself. That's all I need to be." Something changed in the crowd then, not just in his favor, in hers. She was no longer being discussed. She was being witnessed. Whittaker saw it too, saw the county sliding out from under the weight of his money and polish, saw his version failing because Clara had not hidden and because Elias had not hidden her. He drew himself up, brittle as glass. "Very well, let this frontier circus have its little morality play." Mercer muttered, loud enough, "Funny, you're the only clown in it." This time the laughter came openly. Whittaker's face went white with fury. He looked as though he might lash out just to destroy the moment. But he had already lost the only thing that mattered to him here, control over her, over the story, over how the town would carry his name once he left it. He turned sharply, ordered his man to ready the horses, and walked away without another word. No one tried to stop him. No one called him back. Clara stood perfectly still until he disappeared beyond the hotel corner. Only then did her shoulders lower. Only then did she let out the breath she had likely been holding for months. Lucy pressed closer to her side. Anna took her hand on the other side without saying a word. Elias did not reach for Clara immediately. He knew better now. Knew that after public trial, dignity mattered as much as comfort, so he simply moved half a step nearer. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw exhaustion, relief, disbelief, and something warmer threaded carefully through all three. "It's done," he said. She nodded. "Yes." The deputy muttered something about paperwork if Whittaker returned with counsel, but no one much listened. The town had already decided what it had seen. People began drifting back to their errands, but not before offering Clara glances different from before. Not pity, not suspicion. Respect, awkward but real. A few women nodded. Mercer tipped his hat to her directly. The barber's wife crossed the street just to squeeze Clara's forearm once and say, "You spoke well." On the ride home, the air felt different. Not safer exactly. Safety is slow to enter a body that has lived without it, but clearer, like weather after a storm line finally breaks and passes east. Lucy fell asleep leaning against Clara before they reached the cottonwoods. Anna watched the road with mature solemnity for nearly a mile, then at last asked from the front seat, "Does this mean she stays?" The question opened the whole wagon. Clara looked down at Lucy's sleeping head, then at the fields sliding by. Elias held the reins and waited, because now more than ever the answer belonged to her. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but there was no uncertainty in it. "Only if your father still wants me here." Anna gave Elias a look so direct it nearly made him smile. He kept his eyes on the road. "I asked for winter," he said. "Seems to me I'd be a fool to argue with spring." Clara lowered her head, and though she turned slightly toward the wind so no one would make a ceremony of it, he saw the tears gather anyway. Spring did not arrive in one grand moment. It came in increments, in drip water from the eaves, in mud thickening near the troughs, in the first green blade pushing where the south fence kept a little more sun. The hard season loosened its grip slowly, and the ranch loosened with it. The agreement that had once sat between them like a warning was never spoken again. Clara no longer packed and unpacked in her mind each time the sky darkened. She stopped sleeping in her dress. The kitchen knife went back to the drawer. The girls' boots remained by the door because children are always leaving them there, not because flight was needed. The house learned a different kind of alertness now, the ordinary kind, where people listen for calves bawling, for kettle whistles, for one another's footsteps. Meals returned fully to the table, not merely food, but mealtime as a shape of living. Elias found himself home before dark more often than he had been in years. Anna began asking him questions about the accounts and the herd counts, because Clara had quietly pointed out that girls should know figures if they meant to run anything worth keeping. Lucy still told stories badly and with too much confidence, but now she did it from Clara's lap, as if the place had always belonged to her. The first time Lucy called Clara Ma by mistake, the spoon slipped from her own hand and clattered against the plate. The whole room went still. Lucy's eyes widened in horror. "I didn't mean." Clara reached for her at once. "You don't have to be sorry." Her child looked from her to Elias, terrified she had broken something sacred. Elias felt the old ache move through him, the one attached to memory and grave earth and the woman they had all lost. But it did not sharpen into jealousy. That surprised him more than anything. It softened instead. Not because the loss was smaller, because love had made room around it without asking permission. Anna watched him closely, always the careful one. He set down his cup and said, "Some names come when they're needed." Lucy burst into tears from relief this time, and Clara laughed through her own. After that, the change did not happen all at once. Lucy used the name in fragments, shyly at first, then with the thoughtless certainty of a child whose heart has chosen before etiquette catches up. Anna took longer. For weeks she said Clara in the house and motherless things with her eyes when no one watched. Then one rainy afternoon, while helping mend a torn curtain, she asked, very low, "If I say it too, will it mean I loved her less?" Clara set the cloth down at once. "No," she said, voice breaking on the word, "never that." Anna stared at the stitches in her lap. I remember her humming. So do I, Clara whispered. That answer did it, not because it replaced the past, because it honored it. Anna folded into Clara then, not as a child forgetting, but as one finally allowed to carry both grief and new love in the same arms. Elias saw it from the doorway and turned away to give them privacy, though his own vision had gone unsteady. He had feared from the first that loving again might be betrayal, that letting warmth return meant disloyalty to the dead, but the ranch itself taught him otherwise. Spring growth never erased where winter had bitten, it rose through it, around it, because of what the hard season had stripped back. One evening in late April, he found Clara on the porch after sunset, the same place she had once stood watching the road for danger. The yard now lay soft with dusk. Frogs had begun in the low pasture. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted and settled. She heard him and smiled without turning fully. You still walk like a man expecting bad news. I've had practice. He leaned against the railing beside her. For a while, they watched the last light drain from the sky. Then Clara said, "You never asked me to stay." "No. You never asked me to leave either." That seemed wise. She laughed softly. Was it? Probably not. The sound of her laughter in that place, where fear had once stood with her hand on the latch, felt like a circle closing. After a while he said, "I didn't ask because I wanted it to be yours, the choice." She looked at him then, "And if I had gone?" He answered honestly, "I'd have let you," a pause, "then regretted it the rest of my life." Her eyes filled with tears so sudden and bright he had to look away a moment to steady himself. When he looked back, she had stepped closer, not by accident, not from need alone, by choice. He touched her face with the back of his fingers first, giving her time to refuse. She did not, so he kissed her carefully, with all the reverence of a man who has learned what love costs and what it saves. The house behind them glowed warm through the windows. Inside, the girls were likely meant to be in bed and almost certainly were not. A cup sat forgotten on the porch rail. Somewhere, a screen door tapped once in the breeze and settled. Nothing in the moment felt grand. That was how he knew it was true. By summer's edge, the ranch no longer resembled the place Clara had first entered in rags and silence. Not because it had grown finer, because it had grown fuller. Curtains mended and hung straight, supper voices carrying through open windows, wildflowers set in jars by Lucy and rearranged twice daily. Anna taller somehow, steadier. Elias laughing once in a while without looking guilty after. Clara moving through it all not as a guest, not as a replacement, but as herself, the woman who had come asking for work and become the pulse of the house instead. Sometimes in the evening, Elias still sat quietly on the porch and remembered the life before. The first wife he had buried, the years he had let sorrow harden into habit. He did not stop remembering. He no longer had to. Clara would sit beside him then. Not to erase, to join. And inside, if the girls were not already asleep, one voice would call for water, the other for another blanket, and both of them would rise almost at once, smiling before they even stood. The house was no longer quiet in the same way. It breathed. And in that breathing lived the truth Elias Boone had spent too many years outriding. Sometimes a woman arrives in rags and asks for work. Sometimes a broken man mistakes survival for living. And sometimes, without either of them knowing it at first, the thing they thought was only meant to get them through winter becomes the life they were always meant to build.